Hawkins Horrors, a collection of terrifying tales from Netflix's Stranger Things, written by Matthew Gilbert. Chapter 3, Do or 20-Sided Die. First off, to truly understand the ramifications of what I'm about to tell you, you need to understand 20-sided die. Most of you know this stuff already, but some here may not. I won't name names or anything, but you know who you are. The square dice you play Yahtzee with are not what I'm talking about here. That's kid stuff. The most you can lose in games with square dice is a turn, or maybe some fake money with funny colors. In games like D&D, or any tabletop role-playing game for that matter, all that stands between you and certain doom is an icosahedron die. Everyone still with me? Good. Your character has a certain amount of hit points and armor points and other awesome magical stuff. I'll skip ahead on because I feel some of you are rolling your eyes at this, even though it's super important. The number you roll on the die means everything. A high roll could help you vanquish an enemy or magically heal yourself during battle. A low roll is pretty much a death sentence for you and your party. The point is, the 20-sided die determines your chances of survival in any given scenario. Your very life depends on the number you roll. And so, with that PSA out of the way, it all started a few weeks ago. I found myself riding my bike around on the other side of the quarry where that corn dog place used to be. It was an overcast day, but there was no rain, just a cool breeze that seemed to push my bike along in an easterly direction. I mentioned the corn dog place. Well, they weren't the only ones to set up shop around here and quickly fold. No businesses on that side of the quarry, the wrong side of the quarry, last very long, except for one, a magic shop called Prestigitation Station. I had made friends with the owner of the place, an old Italian man named Vivaldi. Despite desperately needing the business to keep the lights on, the old coot never pushed his wares too hard on anyone. Don't get me wrong, he kept the place clean, and was always very welcoming. He loved to turn up the organ music and entertain visitors with sleight-of-hand stuff or a series of quick and easy illusions. But his magical demonstrations felt genuine, like he was doing it for the love of the art form, and not just a quick buck off kids with allowance to burn. "On presto! It's Dustino!" Vivaldi would say whenever I entered the shop, ringing the little bell above the door. "What do you got for me today, Vivaldi?" I'd say back to him, fully knowing he was going to show off his newest gags and tricks, regardless of whether I asked. And as he pulled out some Chinese finger cuffs or disappearing inks for writing secret messages, my eyes would wander to the top shelf of the glass case between us. And there she was, a treasure fit for any dungeon master, an antique 20-sided die. Now this was no normal plastic white die. This die had been carved from real jade, which made it glow a hypnotizing shade of green. It looked oh so rad, with the numbers carefully chiseled in a totally metal-looking medieval typeset. Like Bilbo had Sting and Luke had his lightsaber, I just had to have this 20-sided die of my dreams. I slam a $20 bill down on the case. A 20 for my 20. "Dustino, you know I cannot. We've talked about this," Vivaldi says in that musical tone of voice. "40 then," I say, slapping another 20 down. "That's 2 birthday checks from my great aunt. I'm giving you the last 2 years of my life's earnings for the 20-sided die. Come on, I thought we were friends." "We are, and that is precisely why I cannot sell it to you. This die you seek, she is cursed." "Come on, don't give me that mumbo-jumbo. Trust me, I've dealt with worse. I'm not at liberty to say exactly what, but let's just say I'm not afraid of dealing with the paranormal. I have experience. I wouldn't wish this kind of trouble on my enemy, so I have to say again, no. No means no." The little bell rang behind me. Vivaldi shifted his attention to a group of younger kids coming in to see a few illusions and maybe buy some trick gum. He nodded apologetically at me before excusing himself and headed towards the awaiting crowd. I should have just left. But like an idiot, I saw my fingers walking my hand across the top of the case and around the back of it. It was open. Like the David Copperfield of Hawkins, Vivaldi was in full-on entertainment mode. He had his back turned to me, pulling a pigeon out of his vest to limited applause. The clapping was sparse, but it was just enough noise to conceal the sound of me swiping the 20-sided die and slapping it into my pocket before anyone else was the wiser. My heart was racing. Was I really doing this? The pointy edges of the die poked my thigh and snapped me back to reality. More than the rush, I felt slightly guilty, and decided to do the right thing. I couldn't steal from Vivaldi, so I folded both $20 bills and carefully left them in the glass case, where the die would normally be. I hoped he'd understand. If not, he was now $40 richer, so not a total loss, right? Time out! Dustin swung the flashlight away from his own face and across the store, eventually landing on Erica. He could see she was sitting forward with one hand on top of the other in a T shape, the international sign for time out. There's no magic shop by the quarry, Erica said, skeptical. And I should know. I'm there almost every Thursday shooting fireworks. Is that where my fireworks have been disappearing to? Lucas asked, shaking his head in disbelief. Erica held her hand up. That's not the issue here. The issue is that Dustin is making all this up. I wish I was making this up, Dustin insisted. This isn't one of those places with a giant sign out front. It's discreet. You have to know to go in and shop there. I'm actually not surprised you've never heard of it. I'll stop in next week then, and see if you're telling the truth. You may want to think twice about buying anything from there, especially after you hear the rest of my story. That evening, the Hellfire Club, my D&D group, had its usual session, and I was planning on my character having a legendary winning streak of epic proportions. I'd slay anything with more than 2 eyes, lead my party out of any dungeon, and spellcast heaven and earth with my new jade friend in the palm of my hand. I showed it off to my party as we sat down at the table. Fanfare immediately followed. Henderson! Rock on! Doug, my metalhead ranger, said, throwing up the devil horns. Is that real jade? Our dungeon master asked, taking a closer look through his specs like a prospector. How'd you score a choice piece like this? This is the coolest thing I've ever seen, Vince, our cleric, said with a grin. Bro, we can't lose. Only, I couldn't roll anything above a 4. The session was a complete and utter massacre. A dark mage has cast fevered dreams upon you. It spreads like a rash from your brain into your flesh, the dungeon master announced. How will you counter? I'll summon magic circle, I said, rolling a 2. Groans all around from my party at the table. A pack of lichens have spotted you, the DM taunted. I withdraw and dash into the shadows, I think out loud, rolling the jade die. It stops rolling on the number 1. The lichens are already upon you. Their vicious jaws are laced with deadly poison. Son of a... To add insult to injury, or, let's face it, multiple injuries, my character had lost all weapons, a few pints of blood, and whatever magical healing abilities I had. All I had left was that 20-sided die. I might as well have ripped up my character sheet and started from scratch. Hey, Dusty Pooh, I heard someone say, imitating Susie. Why don't you throw your fancy jade die at the wolves? Maybe they'll feel bad for us and only devour your guts and leave the rest of us alone. They laughed and I cried. On the inside. I sat there helpless as the lichens devoured my character's entrails like a pack of ravenous piranhas. My bike ride home that night was the longest bike ride of my life. I kept replaying every awful roll over and over in my head. Those medieval-style numbers, the ones I thought were so cool in the store, now felt like they were mocking me with those 2s and those 4s, and that awful world-ending 1. Maybe Vivaldi was right. Maybe this 20-sided jade die truly was cursed. I dreaded having to face him again after I'd gone behind his back, but what choice did I have? I had to return the die to its rightful owner before my D&D reputation was ruined for good. My mind was made up. I'd sleep off today's disastrous loss and hit Vivaldi's right after school. I'd apologize, return the die, and maybe even get my $40 back. It'd all work out. somehow. To get my mind off things, I tried watching some Robotech before bed, but I couldn't concentrate. No matter what position I was in, I couldn't get comfortable. I was hot, then cold, then hot again. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck. My mind was racing. I felt the dye against my leg, even though it was in my backpack, which was all the way across the room. Was phantom dye a thing? It had to be, because it was haunting me in a very real way. It began as a slight tickle, then reared its ugly head. The itch. Around the phantom dye spot on my leg, right where I'd stashed the 20-sided die in my pocket that afternoon, a crazy itch now burned like wildfire. The more I scratched and scratched, the farther it spread across my skin. Within minutes, the rash seemed to move up my body and down the length of my arm. I thought I'd put some calamine lotion on it, but my mom said she'd thrown it all out because it had expired. That pink bottle has been sitting in our bathroom forever, and now, of all times, Mom decided to throw it out. Coincidence? I think not. Conspiracy? Unlikely. A curse? Well, the aggravating sensation of the itch kept me awake as I saw the hours crawl by, tossing and clawing at myself all night like a mutt with fleas. I sat up and looked at my arm in the moonlight. There were hives on it. Gross white bumps like little alien eggs all across my forearm. Did I rub up against some poison oak on my bike ride and just block it out of my memory? I showed Mom and she freaked out right on cue. Forget Vivaldi's, she wouldn't even let me go to school until I saw the doctor. It could have been my imagination, but the area around the hives looked green, almost like a shade of jade green. I wish I could cast a healing spell in real life, I said. To no one. Things were bleak. I was talking to myself in a mirror and didn't even stop to cringe at myself. The following morning, while Mom went out to get some more anti-itch stuff from the pharmacy, I saw my window of opportunity. If I was going to get this possibly contaminated, possibly cursed dye out of my life, it had to be now. I bandaged up the rash and biked under a gray sky to the other side of the quarry. Corn dogs didn't even cross my mind. Not this time. Not while that dye was still poking me in the thigh, like a little ball covered in daggers. As the road under my wheels turned to gravel, I began to hear noises. Quiet at first, but becoming louder and more frequent, like the tip-top sound rain makes on rocks moments before it pours. I looked up. There was no rain, not a single drop, but the sound persisted. Something was disturbing the quarry tracks. Something big. Something hairy. I turned to see a blurry shape snap its jaws at me. It nearly took off a chunk of my bike seat. I pedaled faster, screaming. No matter how fast I went, it paced me. The blur barked like a dog, but this was no ordinary dog. It was as tall as my bike tires, possibly taller. 2 crystal blue spheres for eyes that glowed against its matted black fur. Frothing white yellow spit bubbled in its maw. The blur snarled and snapped again. "Go away!" I yelled, but it was no use. The beast became more aggressive. "Screw you, Cujo wannabe!" Up ahead, I could see the outside of Prestigious Station. The safety of Vivaldi's shop was moments away. All I had to do was keep pedaling. I skidded to a stop and leapt off the bike. I bolted to the door, waiting to hear that familiar bell ring. But no such sound would be heard. The door to Prestigious Station didn't budge. A closed sign hung behind the glass for the first time in what felt like years. It was accompanied by a little note from Vivaldi that read, "Family emergency. Back tomorrow. Apologize for inconvenience." I heard the blur growling behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't have to. I could see its reflection in the storefront window as it stalked toward me, baring its fangs. Snarling, snapping. Fitting that I had chosen a magic shop as the place where I would disappear from this planet. As I turned, the beast jumped at me! What?" Lucas interrupted. "Dustin," Mike said, "you've been playing D&D longer than any of us, and the first time you encounter a real live lichen, you what? Totally forget you can defeat it with something silver? You literally jingle around the hallways because of all the quarters in your pockets." "Hey! I told you guys, those are for Dragon's Lair. You know how expensive that game is, Dustin explained. Exactly, Mike exclaimed. Why not throw all that silver at the beast? And lose my $11 and quarters? Who's talking crazy now, Mike? Besides, I threw my bike at it. That's got silver in the spokes, I think. Newsflash, dorks, Robin interjected. Quarters are made of copper now. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. As the gang began debating the silver content of quarters and whether or not Dustin's old 10-speed was enough to vanquish the beast, he quickly quieted the room once again. People, please, listen up. I was in the middle of a story. Now, as I was saying, I was knocked back. I shut my eyes, bracing for the unimaginable pain of its jaws tearing my flesh apart. My arm instinctively came up, the one with the bandage around it, and the beast recoiled. It took me a moment in pure darkness to come to terms with the fact that I was still alive, still in one piece. I slowly opened my eyes to see the beast for what it was, an abomination that was part animal, part demon. Patches of fur, like a hairy husk, covered the slimy underbody of a monster that walked on all fours, imitating a wolf. It backpedaled slowly, its hind legs bending unnaturally, and yet it never took its glowing eyes off me, as if it had encountered a force of nature greater than itself. Now, I'm not saying that the force was me. I'm not the Beastmaster. I'm saying it was reacting to the rash on my arm, which was now exposed, since the bandage had fallen away in the fray. The beast cowered before the itchy rash like it was some diseased thing it wanted nothing to do with. I couldn't believe my eyes. The die poked me again, and now that I saw I was not about to face certain death, I allowed myself to get angry. I have been itched, scratched, humiliated, chased, and almost bitten. I refuse to let this thing poke me again, I said, digging into my creased pocket for the 20-sided die inside. When I pulled out the jade piece, the beast whimpered. Piss off, the both of you! I screamed, tossing the die. The beast scrambled away like I was lobbing a bomb with a lit fuse, returning to its blurry form in the distance, before vanishing entirely in the tree line beyond. And that was when I noticed that the die was still spinning. What? I asked myself. I got back on my feet and walked slowly, cautiously, toward the jade 20-sided die as it hummed to a stop amid the black and gray rocks of the Hawkins quarry. In throwing it, I had just inadvertently rolled a 3. The dice was behaving as if I was still playing. Vivaldi's words echoed in my head. She is cursed! I wouldn't wish this trouble on my enemy. A part of me thought the old man was doing a bit, talking up the cheap jade knockoff to add some mystique to it, but I had encountered nothing but trouble since I swiped it. Maybe this object truly carried some evil, life-wrecking curse. The old man was trying to save my life, I realized too late. And then yesterday's missteps came flooding back in my memory. I put my character's fate, my fate, in the role of this cursed thing. I took my life in the palms of my hands, and the die brought me nothing but true terror in return. Fevered dreams, I remember the dungeon master saying. It spreads like a rash. I looked at the very real hives on my arm. A rash, spreading. Lichens are upon you, the dungeon master also said, moments before wolves chased my character into a dark cave. Visions of the blur hit me. A beast, a lichen, had indeed chased me. But this was no tabletop game. This was real. I was living out my every move in D&D. I was doomed. Oh, crap, I said, realizing I had rolled again. What ominous creature was going to come for me next? The sky suddenly went dark. Clouds morphed into one enormous blob of black above me. I ran home like my life depended on it. Because it did. I ran home, leaving the 20-sided die behind, and my bike. I left in a panic when I heard the shrieking start. I ran home with shapes surrounding me, shrieking like banshees over my shoulders. They were shadows that had somehow become solid, living things with faces, hands, and claws. This is what I had rolled in the quarry. This was what I had accidentally called down upon myself. A horde of wraiths. Evil incarnate. Their dark spirits surrounded me, making me feel claustrophobic, like the air was suffocating me. Air thick enough to choke on, thick enough to stop my heart. There, in the void up ahead, I could see my house, with the lights on in the driveway. Mom's car was there, which meant relief, for the itch no doubt waited inside, along with new topical solutions and pills. But no over-the-counter stuff was going to stop the weights that kept circling me. I tried my hardest to run a little faster, but my feet were tired. They seemed to drag. I felt like I could barely lift my legs, as if I was running in quicksand instead of concrete. Every step got heavier and heavier and heavier. "What's going on?" I managed to say, the words stretching as if I'm talking in slow motion. My hand reaches for the door. It's right there, but I just can't touch it for some reason. I feel the pinprick on my thigh again. And I reached into my pocket, and my heart flies into my throat. The jade, 20-sided die isn't in the parking lot of Vivaldi's. It's in the palm of my hand. It never left me. It wasn't finished with me yet. I see my mom, and she looks back at me one last time. She screams bloody murder. I reach for her, but a dark face swoops in through the doorway like a giant and swallows me whole. And that's about when I wake up. "Boo!" he could hear Steve say while giving him a big, overzealous thumbs down, like you give a losing team at a basketball game. "An unoriginal, it was all a dream ending? Honestly, I expect better from you, Henderson." "Freddy Krueger called. He wants his ending back," Robin added. "Told ya," Erica said, vindicated. "He made it up." The group took turns ribbing Dustin until he stood up and began digging in his pocket. "Am I making this up, jerks?" Slowly and cautiously, Dustin held out something in his hand. He aimed his flashlight at his palm for all to see. There it was, the jade die. This was no illusion. The 20-sided object was really there, right before their eyes. It was just as Dustin had described it. He looked around, and in a grave voice said, "I woke up this morning and found this under my pillow." Erica snuck away from the group to cruise the most forbidden area of the store. Her parents wouldn't even let her peek into the horror aisle, let alone browse it, but they weren't here. She pulled a pocket-sized flashlight from her fanny pack and, like a kid in a candy store, started pulling piles of the scariest-looking tapes off the shelves, pausing every so often to carefully inspect the gross-out artwork on each box, wishing, hoping, to see the cinematic horrors inside. Evil Dead, Poltergeist, Friday the 13th, she read out loud, her mind suddenly reeling. "Wait, do you guys have a generator?" "Are you kidding?" Steve asked. "The bosses are way too cheap for that." "Dang it. No popcorn, no movies, no power. This place sucks." Robin tossed her a few red vines. "There are worse places you could be during a blackout. Trust me." "Like where?" Robin looked at Steve, as if this summoned a taboo subject between them. They shared a knowing look, until Robin finally said, "I mean, we are telling scary stories." "Not this again," Steve protested. "You can help me tell it." "Hello," Lucas piped up. "Tell what?" "Not what. Where," Robin corrected him. Steve joined Robin. She tilted the flashlight, and the glow illuminated his face. Steve paused to check that his friends were listening. He shook his hair to make sure it looked good. Then he spoke. "Some of you might already know this story. Most of you probably don't. But all of you know the place. We're talking about..."